Okay. Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to Catholicism on Tap. What's everybody doing on a Monday night? Mixed results. Okay, that's okay. Well, I invite everybody to have a seat. If you're going to have a seat, I was just telling Joshua up here, true to Catholic form, we've filled the middle and back. Just God forbid somebody sit up here in the front. You brave souls, congratulations. But there's a dozen people that would rather stand for 90 minutes than sit close to the front. We love you too. Okay, and again, feel free to move around and navigate the room, push chairs in, bump elbows a little bit if you need to. We've got plenty of wine and lemonade and beer and food. And so thank you to all of the volunteers that prepared that. Let's give them a hand. And this is actually good timing because I saw that the very Reverend Father Jesse Burrish just walked into the room. And Father Burrish, would you come up and lead us in a blessing to bless our wine and beer tonight? You guys think it's funny or a joke, and it's not. It's very serious business.
It's one of the highlights of my month is blessing the beer and the wines. All right, let us pray. Lord, bless this creature beer, which by your kindness and power has been produced from kernels of grain, and let it be a healthful drink for mankind. Grant whoever drinks it with thanksgiving to your holy name may find it a help in body and soul. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us pray. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, who in Cana of Galilee changed water into wine, be pleased to bless and to hallow this creature wine, which you have given as refreshment for your servants. And grant that whatever it is taken as drink or poured into wounds, it will be accompanied by an outpouring of grace from on high. Thou who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen. Enjoy.
Thank you for clapping for Father Burrish. He was a little nervous. That was his first blessing. Okay, a couple other things tonight. First of all, I'm just going to slide this on. Boom. Okay, so three things. In the back, in the final table, round table, standing in the back, you'll see three items on the table. Perhaps you've seen them, maybe not. We have little stickers, which are all the rage for all you millennial Gen Z people out there. Feel free to grab those. We have fridge magnets for the more boomer people who don't want to lose anything. Sticks right to your fridge. Doesn't go anywhere unless you move it or have small kids over. And this is the one that you never want to lose. Little beer koozie right here, close at hand. We asked for a donation of $5 per each of these items. Nobody's going to police or track that. If you walk out with one, the only thing that you're going to be carrying is this item and a dirty conscience. So you can just scan this thing right here with your phone, pop open your camera, put it on there, a link will come up. You're going to be, wow, what a well-run website. 2 clicks to get my money from my wallet. We're doing something right around here. All right. So thanks, Father, for blessing the wine and the beer. 2 shout-outs to our sponsors. So again, Riverbend Winery, as John the Greater mentioned last week, they have agreed to partner with us for 1 year. So we want to thank them for that. They're giving us a huge discount on wine. Now, you might notice some boxed wine in the back. Just sort of squint past that and then look at the Riverbend Winery. And go out there if you haven't yet. Great place to go for a date or just a refreshing morning and say that you heard about the Catholicism on Tap. I think you'll make them smile very much. Second little sponsor shout out here is J&E Meats, who prepared these meat platters in the back. It's a new family-owned business in Chippewa. Go check them out too. Let's see. Man, okay. I don't know how your guys' Monday was. I had a pretty crazy day. I'm just going to say this real quick. So I went shopping down at Aldi in Lake Hallie today. And as I was down there, I walked in, and it was around noon, so there weren't many people there. And I make eye contact with about this middle-aged woman, maybe 50, 55 years old. And she's pushing her grocery cart. Got a couple items in there. And so we sort of make eye contact, Midwestern style, like almost running into the aisles trying to be polite. And I get around, I grab the eggs, the milk, and everything else. And I'm going to check out, and she's up there right in front of me. She has her items, it's about maybe $30, $40 worth, and she's checking out. And she's like, oh my, I'm so sorry. Oh, no. I forgot my wallet. And I said, well, how much is it, ma'am? So I'm like, all right, I'm Christian. I want to help somebody out. And she's like, okay, $35. That's fine. Ma'am, if this happens to everybody, I heard about this on the Christian radio station. You can pay for other people's coffee and food and stuff, so I'm going to do it. So I pull out my wallet, and I set it down, and I lean over to hand the cashier my credit card, and I look back down, and my wallet's gone. And this lady's running out of the store with my wallet. And I say, stop, that's my wallet. And so I run out after her, and I'm like, ma'am, can I have my wallet back, please? And she hops into her car, and I catch the door as she's about to shut the door, and I grab her leg, and I'm pulling on her leg. I say, ma'am, give my wallet back, just like I'm pulling on your leg right now.
Hold on, Johnny.
Yeah, just made that up right now. Somebody told that to me in college, and I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. I didn't go shopping for months. It was amazing. All right. On a slightly more sobering note, you can see that a very short person, John the Lesser, one might guess, placed that flag there because today is September 11th, 2023, and it marks 22 years after the attacks on the heart of our nation, which took a total of 2,996 lives. And tonight we want to remember these people. Many of them, all of them, the innocent victims, especially those who were not ready to die, those who were not ready to meet their Maker, those who died in fear and in despair. And we want to pray for their loved ones too. And pray for the evangelization of the world, because that's a signal of a world that's hungry, that's starving for God. And that's our job, everybody, as church. And Joshua's going to talk about that in depth here, but our fundamental mission, one of our fundamental missions is not a mission. The church is a mission. It's the mission to bring the good news of Jesus Christ so that people don't do that. So there's this prayer that I want to invite all of us here to pray together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Together, God of peace and mercy,
on this anniversary for September 11th, we lift up the souls who perished on that day. Welcome them with loving arms into your kingdom. Comfort their families and friends. Help us to mourn alongside them with a constant compassion that can only be rooted in you. May we look to the first responders that day to inspire us to live bravely and courageously, and to selflessly protect others in need. May we look to those who opened up their homes to the stranded and displaced that day to stir us to be more hospitable. Having seen the face of evil in darkness, may we be steadfast and faithful in pursuing you, our perpetual light. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. And now to our featured speaker for this evening, Mr. Josh Cooley. So Josh is a native of the Chippewa Valley, raised as a non-denominational Protestant. He converted to Catholicism after several years of investigation and study, In the 10 years since coming into the church, he has served as a catechist in the OCIA programs of St. Mary and St. Raymond parishes in Eau Claire. Josh has endeavored to remain a student of biblical theology, philosophy, and history. He has a bachelor's degree in history and associate's degree in software development, and he currently works as an instructor of software development at Chippewa Valley Technical College. Everybody, give a warm welcome to Mr. Joshua Cooley.
Are we good to go? Can you hear me? I noticed that you did not have any items for Gen X. So, we're forgotten once again, thank you. All right, so my topic tonight was, the title I was given was, The Church, God's Plan to Save the World. So I thought we might start by first talking about what does it mean to save the world, because I don't really want to proceed with just kind of like cultural milieu and assumptions and that sort of thing. So what does it mean to you guys? We're going to start out with audience participation right away. What does it mean to be saved? What are we being saved from, and what are we being saved for? I actually expect you guys to say something.
Sin?
We're being saved from sin.
Like
A little closer?
a little higher, a little closer. Right there.
How about that?
That should be good.
Okay. Let me know if you pick up the breathing, because that's annoying. Any other input? Saved from evil?
Saved for companionship with God.
Saved for companion. Well, you guys, I don't even have to give the talk. You guys already know everything. So, things that are often associated with salvation, we have hell and heaven. What do you guys think of when you think of hell? Or what do you think of when you think of paradise or heaven?
Eternal separation from God and eternal companionship with God or presence in God's presence.
Okay, eternal separation from God. The eternal presence of God. Oftentimes when we think of heaven or paradise, in our kind of our culture, we get two images. Either we get the place where you get to indulge your worldly appetites, like eat as much as you want without getting fat, that kind of thing. Or it's like sitting on clouds with angels and playing harps and that sort of thing. Which I find a lot of people, myself included in my younger days, don't really want to go to heaven. We just don't want to go to hell. Right? So is salvation just a checklist of stuff that we have to check all the boxes on so that we can avoid hell and get heaven?
It's more involved than that.
Say again?
No, it's more involved than that.
Okay. I'm going to propose to you that salvation is unavoidably tied to transformation. Because the question of whether we end up in heaven or hell is ultimately a question of who we become. Are we the kind of people that will bring hell with us wherever we go, even if we went to heaven? Or will we be the kind of people for whom heaven is actually paradise? Because one of the ideas that has been present in the church for a long time is that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. The only people who go to hell are people who choose to go to hell. And we might ask, who in the world would choose to go to hell? But I think that if we really think about it, it's not as strange as you might think. Because when we choose things like anger, hatred, bitterness, unforgiveness, lust, sloth, what we are really doing is we're choosing little bits of hell and carrying those with us. And like in the Bible, sin, or being delivered from sin, sin is described in some places like yeast, that when a little bit gets in, it colonizes the whole thing. And so as we hold on to those things, they get bigger, and they get to hold on to us. But also, we need to become the kind of person for whom heaven is actually paradise. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so let's get started on the rest of our topic, the church. The Catechism says that Christians of the first centuries said the world was created for the sake of the church. God created the world for the sake of communion with his divine life, a communion brought about by the convocation of men in Christ. And this convocation is the church. The church is the goal of all things. What is convocation? Convocation literally means to call together. So it's a gathering together, a calling together of people. So the first thing that this tells me is that the church was intended right from the beginning. The church is not plan B. Right from the beginning, the church was intended. As we think about the idea of communion with God, I want you to look at this picture, which was originally created as an illustration for Dante's Paradiso. And we'll read this passage from the Catechism. In the church, this communion of men with God is the love that never ends. In the love that never ends is the purpose which governs everything in her that is by sacramental means tied to the passing of the world, to this passing world. The church's structure is totally ordered to the holiness of Christ's members, and holiness is measured according to the great mystery in which the bride responds to the gift of love from the bridegroom. So holiness is our response to the gift of love from Jesus Christ. And holiness, again, cannot be thought of as a checklist of things that we have to do. It is who we become. So we got from the beginning, God desires communion. Holiness is not just the means, but it is the goal. And then, as we look at that picture, we see angels circling around God. And if we were to expand it out, you could have the whole universe circling around God. And at the outer edge, you could conceive of hell, essentially all the people, all the angels that want as little to do with God as possible. We oftentimes are told or think about hell as the absence of God, but that's not actually possible. God is present even in hell. And that is one of the reasons that hell is torment for people, because they want to escape God, but they can't. But they have as little, because of God's mercy and love, they have as little of him as is possible. Excuse me. So the saints would be unhappy in hell because they would have too little of God, but the sinners are unhappy in hell because they have too much of God. Lastly, for this slide, I want to point out beauty, truth, and goodness. If we think of God in the center, beauty, truth, and goodness are what are known as the transcendentals. They are the properties of everything that exists because they are properties of God. As we move towards the center, towards God, we become more beautiful, more true to ourselves, and more good. Is that correct? Better? Thank you. Conversely, as we move away, we could become less beautiful, less true to ourselves, and worse. All right, so one of the things we got from the Catechism was that this starts right at the beginning. So I want to take a very short journey through the Old Testament, looking at the pattern of the temple, which is God's meeting place for us. And it is the kind of foreshadowing of the church. So this is a description from Genesis 2 of the Garden of Eden. And I highlighted a couple of the details that were told about it because they're important. Particularly, we got a river flowing out that turns into 4 rivers. We're told that there's gold there. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. Turns out drinking beer beforehand was a bad idea just because it's giving me a froggy throat, but we'll have to deal. All right, so why are these details important? Well, the guy who wrote this, mostly we assume it was Moses, we'll go with that, wrote it so that this would parallel what comes later with the tabernacle and the temple, because he's conveying the message that the Garden of Eden is a temple. It was the place at the creation where God interacted with mankind. So the river flowed out of it. Well, later on, when they build the temple in Jerusalem, there's water that flows out of the side of the temple. And that was a necessity because they offered sacrifice. Thank you. And if you're going to offer a lot of sacrifices, you have to be able to clean the place out. You can imagine what the temple would have been like when they offered literally thousands of sacrifices if they couldn't easily clean it up. So it was important that water was available, and they actually had a spring that came up under the temple and flowed out the side. Bdellium and onyx, we'll come back to bdellium in a second. Gold is basically everywhere in the temple. We'll go on to the next slide here, it kind of shows some of the references too. Gold is basically everywhere in the temple and the tabernacle, so I didn't even give references for it because it's just everywhere. But bdellium, we actually don't know what that is. The Hebrew word is bedelak. They guess at bdellium, but it's probably not that, in my opinion, because the description doesn't really match it very well. But the only thing that we know about it in the Bible is that in Numbers, when they have the Exodus, they describe manna as being like bdellium in appearance. So it's white and lustrous, maybe a little gold looking. Some have likened it to like either pearls or gold or something like that. So again, linking the idea of the manna to the Garden of Eden. And then we have onyx, which was used extensively in the tabernacle and the temple. Most importantly, it was on the priest's breastplate and on the shoulder plates that designated the 12 tribes of Israel. So it was kind of like the stone that designated the nation. So right from the beginning, God created a temple in Eden, a place where he would meet with man and where he actually called man to meet with him. But, as we know, in Genesis chapter 3, that didn't last because man sinned. He chose to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And addressing that, we say the Catechism has, the gathering together of the people of God began at the moment when sin destroyed the communion of men with God, and that of men among themselves. The gathering together of the church is, as it were, God's reaction to the chaos provoked by sin. This reunification is achieved secretly in the heart of all peoples. In every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to God. It's important to note that this is not just about our restoration of relationship with God. That's not the only reason the church exists. It's also about the restoration of relationship with men, fellow men. And those two are so important and so tied together that we'll find out later on, God makes our relationship with him conditional on our relationship with other people. Contrary to kind of the American modern version of Christianity, it is not just about you and God. We do not come to God alone. We come to God as part of a community of faith. Is this the
It's
same?
the same one.
Yeah. Thought I was going crazy for a second there. Okay, so throughout the rest of the Old Testament then, we have what's oftentimes called salvation history, which is God's plan being progressively revealed to lead to the church and to the coming of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. We're going to start out with Abraham offering Isaac on Mount Moriah. So we're skipping over Noah. You can look at that one up on your own. But with Abraham, God is, right before this point, there was a big failure at something you may have heard of, the Tower of Babel. Is that something you guys are mostly familiar with? Yeah? All right. So at the Tower of Babel, man, pretty much as a whole, definitively rejected God again. And we know from other parts of the Old Testament that in God's view of that, man essentially chose the other fallen angels to be their gods. And he said, okay, you can get those guys, but I'm going to pick my own people, and I'll be their God. And he chose Abraham. And kind of the culmination of his covenant with Abraham was when he told Abraham to offer his own son to God. And for this, he chose the site of Mount Moriah. And we have this amazing image of Abraham and Isaac walking up this mountain, carrying a huge bundle of wood. Isaac is carrying it, which, by the way, means he must have been pretty big and strong. He wasn't a young kid. He was of full age and development. And so they get to the top of the mountain, and God stops Abraham from offering Isaac, and instead, he says, I will provide the lamb for the offering. And that's both something that came to pass at the time, but it's also a prophecy of what's going to happen in the future, because God is going to provide the lamb for the sacrifice. But something that's also really important to that is that action of Abraham was used by God to justify everything that came after it. He said, because you have done this, and you did not withhold your only son from me, I will do all of these other things. And he lists the whole covenant that he's going to make. That covenant that actually eventually culminates in Jesus Christ. So God used the merit of Abraham's action to justify everything that came after it. Then we have kind of a side note, Jacob's ladder. Does anybody know that story? Jacob, grandson of Abraham, has a dream in which he sees a stairway or a ladder connecting heaven and earth, and the angels are going up and down, traveling back and forth. We don't know for sure where that happened, but some Jewish tradition holds that it happened on the same site where the temple is now built. And the temple would eventually be built. And that is on Mount Moriah where Isaac was offered. So these are possibly all taking place on the same spot. Then we have Moses and the covenant at Sinai, where after Abraham, God's people went into Egypt and lived there much longer than they were intended to, kind of forgot their heritage and their culture, became tied up with Egyptian religion, and eventually became slaves. But God called them out. Does anybody remember the first reason that God calls them out of Egypt?
Worship.
Right? Calls them out to worship him in the desert. So again, the purpose is to call to worship. So Moses and the children of Israel come out to Mount Sinai, where God makes a covenant with them. God actually shows up in the form of a storm descending on the mountain. Can't imagine what that would have been like to see. But he speaks to the people, and they're so frightened that they say, don't talk to us anymore. It'll be fine with us if you talk to Moses, and then he can talk to us. And this is kind of emblematic of oftentimes the human response. It's not comfortable to have a direct encounter with God. And a lot of times we want it, we want God, but maybe we can have a little bit mediated through something else, right? So anyway, as part of the covenant, God tells them to build a tabernacle, which will be his dwelling place on earth. It's a rebuilding of the Garden of Eden. A little bit later on, we're going to come to David and Solomon, where the tabernacle, which was a traveling tent that moved around, gets built into the temple, which is a fixed, kind of grandiose location. And the nation of Israel becomes the kingdom of Israel. So this is an outline, or a diagram, of what the tabernacle was set up to look like. I wanted to point this out because there's a lot of parallels here. The temple was built basically the same way, on the same pattern. But, say again? No. So as you came into the temple, or the tabernacle, there was a giant brass altar, brazen altar, maybe bronze, but that's where they would do the burnt offerings. Then there was a big, huge brazen pool filled with water. It's called the brass sea, or the brazen sea. Then would be the entrance to the holy place. This was curtained off. Only the priests were allowed to go in. There's 3 things in there. You have the altar of incense, the lampstand, which is the big 7-branched lampstand, and the table of the bread of the presence. Then there's a huge curtain that separates and blocks out all light. The only light in here was the lampstand. There was no light in here at all. And in there was the Ark of the Covenant. All of this, all of the curtains around here, were embroidered to contain cherubim, which we might remember from Genesis 3. When Adam and Eve fell and were exiled from the garden, God put a cherubim to guard the way to the tree of life, to make sure that they could not access it. So the symbolism here is that this is all guarded by the cherubim, and particularly that curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place. The candle stand is described like a tree. It's got literal like flowers, where the flames would be was all flowers, and then it was built to look like a tree. And later in the temple, it was completely covered with garden imagery. They had palm trees and flowers kind of carved into the gold and in the wood and everything. And then the most important thing is that this is, once again, just like the Garden of Eden, where God literally dwelt on earth. So there was a literal cloud of radiant glory that settled over the Ark of the Covenant and over the temple on the outside. And if you were standing there, you could literally see the presence of God, or at least that manifestation of his glory. So imagine for a moment, you're in the temple in Jerusalem. You walk in, there's an outer court surrounding all of this. And if you're a Gentile, you'd be allowed in there. Then you could walk, if you're Jewish, you could walk into the inner court. And you could see all of this stuff around here. Also, incidentally, what does that remind you of? Having a pool of water right at the entrance. It's a baptismal font, which is essentially what that was. The purpose of it was so that before the priests went into the Holy of Holies, they could look in the water like a mirror and see if they had any blemishes that they needed to clean off. And then they could wash in that water if they needed to. So you can see the parallels to how our churches still are built on this pattern today. So we've got the baptismal font as we enter the holy place, the sanctuary or the nave. We've got like the narthex out here. When we come into the sanctuary, we've got the bread of the presence. Do we have a candle, like a prominent particular candle? Yeah. And then we have the tabernacle where God literally sits at the front. So our churches, even to this day, follow this pattern. But imagine that you come into those inner courts, and if you're a priest, you'd be able to walk in here, you see this huge altar that's taller than you are. There might be something burning on it, smoke ascending into heaven. And you walk past the brass sea, the water kind of still sitting in it, into the holy place where it's much darker, only the candle stand is providing light. And then you see a huge blue curtain with cherubim on it, and later in the temple, it had a whole map of the stars on it as well, because it symbolized the whole universe. And you know that right behind that is the literal presence of God on earth. The reason that I point that out and kind of try to make it a little dramatic is because that's the reality that we have in the Mass. When we go to Mass, we have that in front of us. We have the literal presence of God. It's not visible. Back then, it was cut off so that they could not see it. It says, when Solomon built the temple, he said that God will dwell in deep darkness or thick darkness. It's not able to be seen, but it is there. So the church is both the means and the goal of God's plan, prefigured in creation, prepared in the Old Covenant, founded by the words and actions of Jesus Christ. Fulfilled by his redeeming cross and his resurrection, the church has been manifested as the mystery of salvation by the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. She will be perfected in the glory of heaven as the assembly of all the redeemed on earth. The church is both the means and the goal. It's how we get there, but it's also where we're going. Just wonder where that one is. All right, so we took a really quick race through the Old Testament looking at some of those types and patterns because they prefigure what we have in the church today. And I think sometimes when we look at what there was in the past, it can help us remember what we have today. Because it's easy to become blasé about it. It's easy for it to become rote and kind of, as they say, familiarity breeds contempt. It's easy to forget what we have. So the church is, again, the literal place where heaven and earth meet. And it's important to note that this is not primarily talking about the building. It's talking about the people. We are the church. The clergy and the laity both are essential parts of the church, both without which it cannot exist. But the church also does designate sacred spaces. And the purpose of that is to help us remember that there are holy things. In Protestantism that I grew up in, we kind of had the attitude that there's no such thing as really just like holy places or holy items, because everything is holy. God's everywhere, right? But the end result of that was not that we really believed everything was holy. It was kind of that we tended to forget that anything was holy. And so it's important that we do have places and things that are set apart to remind us of the holiness that's there. One of the reasons I pointed out Jacob's ladder is because Jesus actually uses that image to describe himself when he calls Philip, I believe, one of the disciples, in John 1:51. He says, "You will see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man," Jesus. He is the place where heaven and earth meet. He is the nexus, if you will, of those two things. The church is the place where sacrifice is offered. It's the temple. Jesus identified himself as the temple in a few different places in the New Testament. And it is the place where we offer sacrifice, and that sacrifice is Jesus Christ. Now, one of the things that I personally have a hard time remembering, and I kind of have to find myself refreshing it every so often, and every once in a while I'll realize I've gone, for months without, or even years, without really thinking about it. And that's when we go to the Mass, when we take the Eucharist, it's important that we know we're taking Christ and being part of his sacrifice. But an important part of that is that we are offering ourselves along with him. And so it's not just Christ being offered up, it's also us. We are offering ourselves as a living sacrifice. That's essential to our worship. Some of my favorite passages are in Ephesians, where it talks about the church as the mystical Christ. It talks about, in Ephesians 1 or 2, I think it's 1, it says that the church is the fullness of Jesus Christ. It's the fullness of him who fills all in all. That's pretty astounding, really. The church is everything that Jesus Christ is. There's nothing of Jesus Christ that is not present in the church. It also says in Ephesians 2 that the church reveals the manifold wisdom of God. Manifold literally means many-colored wisdom of God to the powers and principalities of heaven. So even the angels, both good and bad, did not know everything that God has revealed through the church. The church is revealing the truth even to them. That's one of the reasons that Paul calls what goes on in the church a great mystery. So one of the things that happened when Jesus died on the cross was that the veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom. The Holy of Holies was exposed. And you can see that when you go into our churches, because there is no veil marking off the sanctuary in the front. We can see everything that goes on up there. The presence is still concealed, hidden in a way, under the appearance of bread and wine. But we still have a tabernacle up in front. Why do you think that the presence is concealed? Wouldn't it be easier if God just showed up? We couldn't handle it if he did. That's undoubtedly true. One of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. He wrote a book called Till We Have Faces. And the point of the book is a complaint against God from one of the characters about that very topic. Why does God not reveal himself? Why does he deal with us in riddles and hints and never just show up? And the answer that he gives in the book is that God can't meet us face to face till we have faces. The point is that we are not capable of meeting God yet. We don't get that kind of vision of God because it's not possible for us to involve ourselves in it. We could not take it. We still have too much of hell in us to get that fullness of heaven. That sounds really bad, but I don't mean it to be like a super condemnatory thing. But hopefully you get what I mean there. We haven't been refined like gold in the fire enough yet. All right. So this is one of my favorite quotes from history. We got a history teacher somewhere over here, I know. I think you enjoy this one. So there was a Viking prince, Vladimir of Kiev, who was investigating different religions. He was a pagan at the time. And he sent emissaries to investigate Christianity and Islam and Judaism and that sort of thing. And this is the response that he was given from his emissaries that went to Constantinople. Then we went to Greece, and the Greeks, including the emperor himself, led us to the edifices where they worshiped their God. And we knew not whether we were on heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor or such beauty. And we are at a loss how to describe it. We only know that God dwells there among men, and their service is fairer than the ceremonies of other nations, for we cannot forget that beauty. One of the things that this always calls out to me is the importance of beauty, the importance of the aesthetic dimensions of the Mass. It matters how beautiful it is. The aesthetic dimensions are important, but they're not the most important thing, because it's beauty, truth, and goodness. And beauty is not only the outward visible beauty. It's also, each of those things kind of has the others involved with it. So truth is beautiful, or should be. Goodness is beautiful. If we have only the outward and don't have the truth, then that is worse than having the truth and not having the outward beauty. If we don't have the goodness, but we have a beautiful aesthetic setting, that's worse than having the goodness and not having the beautiful aesthetic setting. But the aesthetic setting does matter. And it also matters because of the hiddenness. Because we need those things, the visual, the auditory, the smells, the bells. We need those things to help us see the reality that's going on, to remind us of the fact that there's something going on here that's more than what I can see. And those things are important in raising us up into that. I've always thought it was interesting. I never knew the word passion meant suffering until I became a Catholic. And I've always thought it was interesting that we use the same word for love and for suffering. But one of the aspects that I've always thought was very beautiful of the church is sometimes referred to as bridal mysticism. The idea of the church as the bride of Christ. And I want to parallel it to the original bride, of the story of Adam and Eve. So in the Garden of Eden, one of the very first things that happens in human history is a wedding. Incidentally, total tangent, does anybody know what genre of literature the entire Bible is?
Love story. Love story?
More or less, but in classical terms, it would be considered a comedy, because it begins and ends with a wedding. That was the defining point of comedy, which is why Dante calls it the Divine Comedy. All right, so the beginning, we have a wedding. Adam is put into a deep sleep. God removes his side, takes flesh from his side, and creates his bride, Eve. She becomes flesh of his flesh, which is the signal that they are compatible to be married. And then, after that, they face the serpent in the garden. And Adam's job, I forgot about this, but on the very, very first slide, it said his job that God gave him was to keep and tend the garden, which means both to work it and to guard it. And that was the same as the job that was given to the priests in the tabernacle and the temple. Their job was both to upkeep it and to guard it. And Adam failed in that mission. He did not protect the garden, and he did not suffer for his bride. Instead, he stood by and let the serpent have his way. So Jesus parallels this. If we look at his passion, it begins in a garden. He goes into the sleep of death, which is like a deep sleep. In the Genesis, it literally means like a deep, dreamless sleep where there's just oblivion. His side is pierced on the cross, and blood and water come out, which is baptism and the Eucharist, which is the sacraments that create the church. So the church is literally taken from his side, just like Eve was taken from Adam's side. It is through the blood and the flesh of the Eucharist that we become flesh of his flesh, and so become a suitable bride. I've always thought it was really weird when I was growing up that the church is described as both the body and the bride of Christ. Who marries their own body, right? That seems like some kind of weird modern thing. But it's actually right there from Genesis. Adam was the first person to marry his own body because she was flesh of his flesh. But unlike Adam, Jesus did not shirk away from his passion. He undertook the battle with the serpent and defeated him on the cross. In Catholic tradition, the cross is oftentimes referred to as the marriage bed of the Lamb, because that's where Jesus consummated his wedding with the church. And we re-engage with that in every Eucharist that we celebrate. The Eucharist is the foreshadowing of the eventual, final wedding feast of the Lamb. But this imagery is all meant to give us some notion of God's desire for us, because he created the union of man and woman to foretell that, to prefigure it. The love that we have in marriage is meant to be an image of his love for us. All right, so now we move on to some of the practical stuff. I have no idea how on time am I? Okay. So, how should we live in light of the fact that God desires communion with us? That he wants us to be his bride, and that he's made this way of communion with him, where we can come into his direct presence, and we can feed our life from him. Well, the first thing we have is the 4 pillars of the church, which parallel Acts 2:42. It says, right after the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, the church devoted themselves to these 4 things. The 4 pillars of the church are teaching, especially as exemplified in the Creed, the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, prayer, which can be both personal prayer but also liturgical prayer, and then morality, which is the only one that's different in that list. Oops, wrong button. There it was fellowship. So I think that's a clue that our moral standards and that sort of thing are one of the primary reasons they're there is to govern and to guide our fellowship with our fellow man and with the other members of the church. So we should devote ourselves to the teaching of the church, to engaging with the sacraments, to a life of prayer, and to practicing morality. Now, again, these are not to be understood as a checklist of things that we have to do in order to gain the prize. These should be understood as the means of transformation. These are the things that it's kind of, I like to use analogies. So this is like the diet and exercise you have to do to get the peak physical condition. You don't kind of earn physical condition by doing these things. It's just what happens when you do them. I also like to kind of focus on what the church, or what the Creed says about the church. We recite this every Sunday. We say the church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. There aren't many churches, there's only one. Jesus doesn't have many bodies, just one. There aren't a ton of different baptisms, just one. And that's really, important because it talks about the unity that we need to have as a community, but also the fact that there isn't another game in town, as it were. This was one of the unique things, we talked about the temple and the tabernacle and all that stuff, was one of the unique things about Israel was all the other religions, they had many temples, but Israel only ever had one. And the only place that you could go to fulfill the law of God's covenant was that one temple. We talked a little bit about holiness and what that is. The root of holiness is love. It's our response, as the Catechism says, our response to God's gift of love is holiness. What does it mean that the church is Catholic?
Universal.
Universal, right. Okay, so Protestants, including me when I was Protestant, we all agreed with this. But we took Catholic in a somewhat different way. We agreed it means universal, but that just meant that everybody was Catholic, whether if you're a Christian. What the word Catholic actually means in a Catholic understanding is the literal Greek is according to the whole. And it means that our belief and our practice has to match what the whole church has always taught and practiced. So if the church in 100 AD believed one thing, we can't believe the opposite of that now because we have to match what they did. We are bound by what the church has always taught and believed and practiced. There can be differences of certain kinds. I'm reminded of a passage, I don't know if you guys have ever run into this, where Paul talks about those who preach another gospel. And in English, it often says, if you preach another gospel, you're anathema, you're condemned. But if you preach another gospel, that's okay. But in Greek, it's another of a different kind or another of the same kind. And that gets lost in the English. But there are changes which are in the same kind. Like an acorn growing into a tree is not a different organism. It's the same organism, but it looks a little different, right? So we can have some kinds of changes as long as they're in character and they're part of the tradition. The tradition can grow. Important. All right. We also have the 3 evangelical councils. These come directly from Jesus himself. They are recommendations for a Christian holy life. When we look at those, we often probably think of religious life and priests, because they actually take vows about these things, where most of us are not required to take a vow. But we are all required to live according to these in some way. They look different based on our station in life and our vocation, but they're there for everyone. So chastity, for example, if you're a priest, you're called to celibacy. If you're married, you're called to faithfulness. But those are both chastity. If you are like a Franciscan, you're called to a kind of radical poverty where you own nothing. But if you are a normal layperson, you are called to a kind of poverty where you do not let your possessions own you and you give freely. But they're both poverty of spirit. And I've often heard, and in my experience it's true, that obedience is the hardest one of these. We're all called to obedience. Priests and religious take oaths or vows of obedience, but we're all called to obey just authorities in the church. The hard part of obedience is that it doesn't just mean when you agree. If I only obey when I agree, that's not obedience, that's just the fact that I have the same opinion that you do. So it doesn't become the virtue of obedience until you actually disagree. Now, we are obviously not required to obey an authority that commands us to sin, because we have to obey God before men. But even if an authority, like a religious leader, becomes wicked, that does not excuse us from obedience. We just have to be discerning about what they say. And there's many examples of that in the Bible. One of my favorites is that we all know the Pharisees are kind of the bad guys in the New Testament, right? Jesus actually told his disciples that they had to obey the Pharisees. He said, they sit in the seat of Moses, which should sound familiar to us because we talk about our bishops and our Pope sitting in the seat of Peter or in the seat of the apostles. And that is their authority. And he said, even though they're doing all this stuff wrong, you have to obey them. Do what they say, don't do what they do, because they're hypocrites. So even when an authority figure is questionable in their own life, that doesn't excuse us from our responsibilities. Another one that is a little bit contentious sometimes is the idea of we want to get rid of like false teachers and we want to kind of purge bad believers out of the church and things like that. But Jesus actually addresses this in Matthew's gospel where he tells the parable of the wheat field. And in that parable, it talks about a farmer who goes out and plants a field of wheat. And in the night, the enemy comes and sows weeds in the field as well. And the farmer's servants, the next morning, ask him, well actually when the wheat sprouts and the weeds come up, they ask him, well didn't you plant good seed? He said, yes I did, but the enemy did this. And so then they say, well should we go tear out all the weeds? And he says, no, don't do that. Because if you do that, you're going to tear out a bunch of the wheat too, and we'll lose part of the harvest. Instead, we'll let them grow side by side until the end, and then we'll harvest it all, and we'll separate the weeds out then. And we'll take the good wheat into the barn, and we'll burn the weeds. So, it's important to be discerning. We should question, and when we see wrong behavior, when we see wrong teaching, we should call that out. But it is not our job to try and pull the weeds out of the church. Even the angels, because Jesus explains this, and in his explanation he says that the workers that ask are the angels. So even the angels are not allowed to pull the weeds out of the church. All right, so we're nearing the end here. I think this is probably the last slide, if I remember right. But to me, this is radical stuff. Maybe it'll be all like, oh yeah, no big deal to you guys, but I am routinely shocked when I'm confronted by how radical Jesus' message is. Who do we have to love? I couldn't hear individual answers, but I'm going to assume you said like your enemies, your neighbors, everybody, stuff like that, which are all right. One of my favorite quotes is from G.K. Chesterton, who is eminently quotable, but he said, Jesus told us we have to love our neighbors and our enemies, probably because they're often the same person. But it is amazingly different than the standard thought of the world that we have to love everyone. Most of the world, including most cultural Christians, have groups of people that it's okay to hate. Everybody, they say, when it says love everybody, everybody's like, yeah, that sounds great. Until you run into a pedophile or a rapist.
So two things. First, on a more present topic. Great example of this is Jesus often spent a lot of his times with criminals, thieves, and pedophiles, things of that sort, sinners.
Right.
People who had done the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, I just listened to an interview with John Bergsma. Maybe some of you know, he's a teacher at Steubenville and fellow of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. But he was pointing that out when he talked about Matthew being a tax collector. And people today don't really realize how bad that was. But at the time, he made the comparison that at the time, a tax collector to them would be like a drug dealer to us. Basically, tax collectors were people who essentially robbed the poor for their own profit. Right? So there are some really unlovable people in the world. And we are called to love them. And I think it's either a C.S. Lewis or I think it's C.S. Lewis, but there's another quote that starts out by saying that love isn't love unless it means loving what's unlovable. If we accept that God loves everyone, can we have God's heart if we hate things that he loves, and especially people that he loves? one of the great kind of appellations of the Bible is that David was called a man after God's own heart. Can we be people after God's own heart if we hate what he loves?
Just to clarify, what would be your definition of love?
That's a great question. My definition of love is to will the good of the other person. It does not mean liking them, right? So it means to desire good for them. It doesn't mean being nice all the time. It generally, I would say, does mean being kind, but that's, questionable. Sometimes you have to get pretty rough.
Love can be required.
Right. Tough love, we've all probably heard of that. But love means doing and desiring what is good for someone. And that, again, that's something that our culture does not understand at all. So, there are all sorts of people in our culture who need to be told the truth, and they aren't being told the truth in the name of love. It is never loving to lie to someone, especially about topics of eternal life and topics about virtue and vice, because it is never good for someone to be deceived in that way. Now, how we tell people the truth is also important, because because it is easy to use the truth to wound people, and we need wisdom to know when and how to use it to their benefit. All right, the ending quote. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. And this is another of the reasons why it's easy to understand how people can choose hell over heaven. Because oftentimes the path of love is incredibly hard, and it is painful. And it's easier to embrace other things as coping mechanisms oftentimes, but to avoid the pain of love. All right. I believe I'm out of time, so.
Well, I didn't have a question, but I did want to say the other thing, the second thing I wanted to bring up earlier was that while we are not to pull the weeds from the field, that is not to say that we are to ignore them. We can bring them into a brighter area.
Yeah.
They are not forsaken. Just
Right.
because they are in a dark place now doesn't mean they have to remain there. And we can
True.
be a part of bringing them to a better place.
Yeah, and that's really the new evangelization, right? Re-evangelizing the church. Those people in the church who are not, they're maybe sacramentalized and catechized, but they haven't been evangelized.
Any questions? We'll take one. Just make it really, really easy. In the back there. Dan?
Right, so God is omnipresent. He is everywhere. There is nowhere that is outside of God. God is also what holds everything in existence. So if something were actually, truly, completely separated or absent from God, it would literally not exist. So in order for something to even exist, it has to participate in God to some degree. And so that includes hell. Even hell is still present to God. And Father Burrish is around here somewhere. He can correct me if I say anything heretical. Okay? All right?
Okay. Thanks, John. All right. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Joshua, for coming out and sharing your knowledge. I learned a few things tonight, and I hope you guys did too. Thanks for coming out to Catholicism on Tap. Come out next time to hear a fine gentleman standing there in the back, who I will not point out specifically. I'll keep you guessing, unless he raises his hand, to talk about who is saved. What does it mean to be saved? So we're going to dive into the salvation controversy, as it's sometimes called in theology or ecclesiology. Who's saved? How do we know? How come? So come out whatever the first Monday in October is, and because it's not Labor Day, and we'll see you then. God bless everybody. Feel free to take some snacks and a little sip out the door, not too much, a little water, I mean, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.